Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the film. Just quickly before we jump into our panel discussion, I just want to say a massive thank you to the team at Trinity and their sustainability department, to Jane, to Una, to Harry, to everyone here, just for really welcoming us and providing us with this opportunity to screen the film. Personally, it's an absolute honour to be back here at Trinity after graduating 8 years ago. I definitely don't think I thought I'd be moderating a panel with Mary Robinson, and also with Nessa and with Paul, so yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity. Our panellists here today are Professor Nessa O'Connor. She is a Trinity College zoology professor who has specialised in marine biology. We have our first woman President of Ireland, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, former Chair of the Elders, author, and a passionate advocate for both climate change, gender equality, and the climate crisis, Mary Robinson. Also, we have executive producer of the Our Blue World film and founder and CEO of Blue Tech Research, Paul O'Callaghan. So can I please get a bullabus for our panellists here today? So to kick off this panel discussion, I mean, we have shared this film throughout the world. And it's been amazing to have the opportunity to do that. We've screened it in small communities like the one you saw in San Pedro de Casta in Peru. We've screened it in China. We're now screening it in Dublin. And I think every time someone watches this film, it's always interesting to see which character or which story resonates with them most. So I'd like to start with you, Mary, and ask this question to everyone here on the panel today. Which of the stories or individuals in the film spoke most to you and resonated with the work that you're doing right now in this space?
Thank you, Aoife, and congratulations on the film. I loved it. What I really loved about it, and I will try to answer your question, is that it was very much that we are nature, yes, and the ways in which we're nature, and the reinforcement of that. And we talk a lot about indigenous wisdom now, where we learn, we know, you hear it all the time at climate conferences, but we don't know what we mean sometimes. And I thought your film brought that out very well. So I really can't distinguish. I thought each of the people who spoke and the context in which they spoke and the fact that it was all over the world, including happily in Ireland and in Mayo, it's so relevant at the moment. It's so important. And, I think the more we can reinforce that message, and for what it's worth, I now believe we should give personhood to rivers and to mountains and to the not the full human rights of human beings, that doesn't make full sense, but actually, above all else, the right not to become extinct. There was a reference to the extinction of nature, and species, which is one of the real problems at the moment. So there should be a right not to be extinct. That's the lawyer in me talking, if you like. I'm actually very pleased to be here wearing, I think, two relevant hats. One is I am, of course, the adjunct professor of climate justice here in Trinity, so I'm delighted this is happening here in the Business School in Trinity, which is often a place now that we gather, and Jane knows that very well, for meetings of all kinds. But it's really good that this one is highlighting the importance of the reality that we are nature, and that we need to, in particular, focus on water as part of our life that gives us life. And secondly, I'm a guardian of the planetary boundaries. When I told my small grandchildren that, they were so impressed. They thought it was all to do with Star Wars and everything. But actually, it's supporting the science, in particular of Johan Rockström, who has identified for about the last 20 years, but increasingly, the importance of seeing the links between the 9 planetary boundaries, one of which is climate change, one of which is fresh water, one of which is the oceans, etc. And it's been really important for me because I went from climate justice to the climate and nature crisis. Now I talk more and more about the planetary crisis because it's all connected. And the good news is that we did retrieve and restore one of those planetary boundaries, the ozone layer. I mean, I do remember, and I'm sure some of us in the audience remember well, we thought we were going to be fried in the 1980s. And we learned it was these chemicals, and we got the Montreal Protocol quite quickly. And so we were able to reverse that because it was simpler than the complexity of the climate and nature crisis, the planetary crisis that we face. But what I loved about the film, in essence, was the message: everybody can do something. We can all do something about it, and we should. So that was really what I took from it, more than anything.
Wonderful, yeah, thank you. And I think one of the lines that always sticks with me in the film is from that Wanganui section, where they say that, you know, the river has a right to not be polluted, you know, as much as we have a right to have access to that river. And I think that's something that you're highlighting there. Nessa, anything in particular jump out?
I guess the scientist in me was really interested to see the inside, that footage I'd never seen before, inside Biosphere 2. That was really interesting. But the human in me was probably more interested in, can't remember her name, the hydrologist in Burundi, because it's, you know, it's about people. I'm a natural scientist, but people are part of the blue planet, and, you know, 2025, nobody should be dealing with cholera. And so we have the science, we have the facts. It's implementing what we know we need to do. That's what the problem is.
Wonderful. And Paul, I mean, you came up with the concept for this film, and, you know, you were part of the whole journey. You traveled the globe, you met all the characters in this film. What I would ask you is, you know, what were some of the lessons you learned along the way? Maybe you can share a little bit with the audience about your background, how you came as a scientist to make this film, and, you know, what were some of the key nuggets in there for you during this process?
Sure. So I mean, my own water story began where I grew up out a small town of Middleton in Cork, and I grew up next to a body of water. And I think I spent my childhood paddling around in that, and that gave me a deep sense of connection to it. And when I saw it was being polluted, as a teenager, I became very affected by that, and felt we needed to do something about it. 10 years later, I found myself working in Malaysia in highland rainforest with the World Wildlife Fund, and became aware of the connection between the forest and water and life, and that led me on a pathway to study water resource management, study marine biology, which most people dream of being a marine biologist. I think my kids do. But I went into the freshwater side of it, which is connected, and that led me on a journey. I'm very fortunate in that regard. I've got to see some really incredible innovations around the world, and pioneers and people that solve problems. So everywhere I was looking, I was seeing solutions, and yet I felt that the narrative was very much one-sided. It was lopsided towards the doom and the gloom and the apocalyptic tales of, you know, what could happen, wars would be fought over water. And I felt, yeah, there's a counter story to that where we can achieve things. And that led us, Aoife walked into my office as a graduate from TCD and interviewed for a job, and little did you know, Aoife, we would find ourselves, you know, traveling all over the world. You were defending cameras from monkeys at one point in Singapore. And
That wasn't in the job spec.
No, there was a lot wasn't in the job spec. Trundling through the snow in Davos, interviewing Matt Damon. It became a wonderful journey. When we came to make this film, we were very lucky. I asked Aoife to find the best director she could find, and I asked him, and he said no. So I asked him again, and I managed to persuade Ruan McGann, thankfully, to come on this journey with us. So, Ruan. And I think through that journey, Ruan, it's fair to say that we found all the stories wove into one another, and what we were seeing in Peru was being echoed in New Zealand and was being echoed by the Cree Nation. And it wasn't that they all got together and decided this. It was like a Renaissance movement was happening where people were all over the world rediscovering something at the same time simultaneously. And then, you know, we call it a water odyssey, which is a journey, and it was a journey. And one of the things we learned is that although we often think about climate change that we experience through floods and droughts, it also flows in the other direction also. How we manage water, and you saw that in the story of the sponge cities, can have a positive effect on our climate. And that was probably one of the most important epiphanies to come out of it, for me anyway, personally.
Wonderful. And Mary, just to go back to you, I know you've been a long-term advocate for female voices in this space and also for indigenous voices, and you've been doing a lot of work through Dandelion. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that work. What makes you hopeful for the young generation coming up today? I think Dandelion and programs like you're running are really important and catalyse that action. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about Dandelion for anyone who's not familiar with that work.
Well, in many ways, this film fits very well with the whole idea of Project Dandelion. because what it was about was we're just not communicating well about the climate and nature crisis. We're far too much on statistics and technical, and people don't feel moved from the heart. So Project Dandelion began with connected women leaders who were mainly women involved in communications, and they had begun to link climate change, health, and what was the third thing now? Just think. Climate, health, and...
The economy?
Yes, and the economy, basically. I converted this into climate justice in the sense that it can be wrapped in that way. And we were talking about the need for women leaders to step up more urgently. And I talked about the President Kennedy's what do you call it, the moonshot, and I got complete pushback. This was at a meeting in Bellagio of these women leaders after they'd, if you like, moved towards climate justice in an integrated way, and now the moonshot idea just didn't appeal. It was male, it was military against Russia, etc. No, you better message in a different way. So I started talking about all flowers blooming, and I was told that was Maoist. But the flowers idea grew, and we actually had a very good design team who came up with the dandelion. And I love the dandelion precisely because it's a weed. The weed grows through the cracks, and we have so many cracks at the moment in our world. And the more I learned about the dandelion, the more I liked this nature symbol. The dandelion grows on all continents. It's very resilient. You can't get rid of it off your lawn if you want to, and many people, probably quite a few people in this room, and certainly relatives of mine, want to get rid of it, but I think of it now as a beautiful flower, which it is. It's also got deep roots which regenerate the soil. There's no waste. You can eat or drink any part of the dandelion. You have it in wines, you have it in soups. Apparently the roots take toxins out of the human body. Don't ask me how. And I know that racehorses in a field, I learned this from my brother in Galway, who's very keen on racehorses and as a racehorse owner friend. And she told me that when racehorses see dandelions in a field, they go for the dandelions because they have iron in the leaves. So they're particularly nourishing. And how do you spread it? You blow. And when children blow, they often wish. So you blow and wish. So it's the perfect symbol to connect us. And why do I believe in symbols? Because I saw a symbol work. On the night of my election in 1990, I said I'd put a light in the window of Áras an Uachtaráin. And I totally underestimated that light. It took on a life of its own. The reason I put it there was that we were neglecting, over the years, those who had to emigrate from Ireland. As a senator, over a period of 20 years, I'd managed to visit quite a lot of very good immigrant centres, migrant centres, in the UK, in the US, in Canada, in Australia. And they were doing great work. And in fact, they were linking with all migrants. They'd gone on from just the Irish to linking with other migrants in a remarkable way, but they had no support from Ireland. Ivan Boland wrote a poem called The Irish Emigrant, and the first line, as I recall, is, "We put them out like lamps in the dark." Just that kind of complete. So what happened with the light, because it appealed so much to everybody outside Ireland, that we wanted the connection, because they wanted the connection. So that light took on a life of its own. I mean, in fact, as president, I never got to mention it, because I was always greeted with, "We know you have a light in the window and how much it matters." I mean, I was literally greeted by the light. And it shaped the Irish diaspora, and the policies followed very quickly. And we now have very good policies. I actually loved the film using art and music. It's so important. It's art and music and storytelling that are going to move this whole debate. And so Project Dandelion is about women leading, but not women only. The reason for the women leading is we don't have enough women leading in the world. We don't have parity at the global level. If we had gender equality, gender parity at the global level, half the countries in the world would be run by women. I mean, women would be at the top. Wouldn't we have a much safer world? Wouldn't we have a much better world? Of course we would. It's not that women are better than men, it's the balance. So we're women-led, but not women only. We're very keen that men, my loyal husband Nick always wears the dandelion, but the idea is to tell the stories in exactly the way this film tells the stories. What people can do to link with nature, because we are nature, to learn from the indigenous wisdom, to learn from... It's precisely the kind of approach that Project Dandelion has been working on. We work to get women-led climate movements at the global level. This was our initial task, to get them to start working more together. In my experience going to COPs, I would meet a number of women leading very good organizations, but they were always separate in their silos, partly guarding their funding. You know, this idea. Now, if you go to the UN General Assembly, I met both of you, I think, at the UN General Assembly with the Planetary Guardians. I'm sure you became aware of how women leaders are affirming each other. There's sort of a much more of a powerful sense of being together. But the whole idea is to link with those on the ground, with indigenous communities, with grassroots, with young people, young entrepreneurs, etc., and get some of the climate finance down to that level, because only about 1% of climate finance gets to those who are making the difference on the ground that you were filming about. I mean, literally, there's no connection between the climate finance, which is big numbers, and what's happening on the ground and the difference communities can make. So I've become very passionate about building the bottom up and using Mehel in Ireland, using the spirit of Mehel to engage, which I was happy to see in the film. So I could go on, and I won't, I think, but I'm very enthusiastic because I see the complete connection with what we're doing in Project Dandelion. And you don't have to wear this wooden badge. In India, we have a great group with us called the Self-Employed Women's Association. There are 3.2 million members. It's a trade union of the poorest of the poor. And they don't have a dandelion like this. They just crochet onto their clothes or onto a bag or something. Lovely yellow crocheted dandelions. But they know the dandelion. It grows up in the Himalayas where it's a bit cooler. And they see it as nature. They embraced it immediately and effortlessly as part of their work now on climate, which they're doing. And, so I'm wholly supportive of the components of the film, the way you've approached it, and the way you've explained how important the indigenous wisdom is, and the indigenous science, and how significant it is all around the world in what was done in ancient times that we can learn so much from.
Thanks, Mary. I think the overarching theme really is connection, and that was something that we really thought about before we decided to make this film. And I like that you picked up on the music, the art, the culture, the religious, the rituals that are mentioned in the film, because if we can reconnect ourselves back to water and create communities around that, there's nothing that we can't achieve. And the whole concept behind the dandelion is, you see dandelions blowing in the wind. That's the scale. The seeds are being planted everywhere as these ideas are populating up. And I hope also you got a sense of that from the documentary. There's the individual and there's the collective, and we can scale. And getting back to that connection piece, a lot of the work you do, Nessa, is very much on the sea and the ocean and the marine, which is very much connected to this film. I mean, it was a film about fresh water, but the water cycle is something that is constantly changing and evolving. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about the research that you're doing, the water cycle, and just the overall connection there to those systems.
Well, most of us do live beside the coast, an estuary, or near a river. And so all of these systems are connected. Everything, as an ecologist, we know you pull one thing and everything, and humans are part of that big picture as well. So I guess I'm thinking about, if any of my students are here, they'll say a lot of what we teach is quite gloomy. We're talking about coral reefs dying, and I have to give the truth. This is what's happening. But coming up to the end of term as we are now, we try and come with this focus on the solutions, because they have to fix this mess that we've created that we're handing over to them. And there is a lot of stuff at the moment. There is a swell. Now, my research is sort of the coast, so that's a little bit, that's my bias. Looking at how we're going to need to feed 8 billion people, 10 billion people pretty soon. A lot of the world gets their protein source from coasts. Aquaculture is something that we have a long history of in Ireland, some positive, some negative. But there is definitely a positive swell at the moment towards a more, what we now call, instead of aquaculture, regenerative ocean farming, where we can do it better. We can grow things like in a restorative way, putting back things like kelp beds, mussel beds, oysters, things that we historically ate for years, but cultivating them, and they're purifying the water, and they're giving back, and they're replenishing biodiversity. And we know how to do this. It's getting people to actually, and the people who live in the coast want to do it. It's the politics behind it all, it's the management of it all, and we also have all of our goals. I don't want to get into the statistics. That's what I do, the statistics behind it all. But we know that we have to protect 30% of our marine ecosystems by 2030. Mm-hmm. 3 years ago we were at 3%. Now we're at 10%. We're getting there, but we need to ramp it up because we're kind of laggards in the European scale and in the global scale. So these are positive tools within the framework, but we need to ramp it up, pretty much.
I think one of the things that you mentioned there is, we have these goals. We're not short of goal setting. There's a lot of them. And one of the things that you had mentioned, Mary, in New York that really I was quite captivated by was this concept of what is required for policy to change, for there to be more movement. And you mentioned, a chief planetary scientist or a chief planetary guardian, someone whose job is at that high level to protect and to advocate and to connect. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I wonder, having spent so much time as an elder, right, what keeps you hopeful? What keeps you doing the work that you're doing?
Well, the idea of encouraging countries, and particularly countries, in a balanced way all around the world, both developed and developing, to have the guidance of a chief planetary scientist. A number of countries have a chief scientist, but we feel it's the chief planetary scientist, and it's that science, that connection that is needed. And this is, as I say, is one of the goals of the guardians of the planetary boundaries. We have commitments from a number of countries now, including the UK is really very interested. They have a chief scientist, but they see the need for... Now, why is that important? Because I think if we had a chief planetary scientist in countries that had access, like during COVID, the chief medical officer. Do you remember how, we listened in fear to the chief medical officer because this was determining. And, we had to wear masks, we couldn't shake hands, we had to stay at home for a while, we had to learn how to do things. We had to learn how to do these tests on ourselves, the COVID tests, etc. This was all new, and it was all because we knew that if we didn't, we might die. We are at a very, very critical stage. I mean, you mentioned the coral reefs. During Belém, which I've just come from, in Brazil, we had a very good presidency that tried very hard, but we had massive propaganda misrepresentation from the oil, gas and coal lobby, the fossil fuel lobby. There were 1,600 there. Most of the delegations of small islands are at most 10 people. And here were 1,600 misrepresenting. Saudi Arabia was more emboldened than I've ever known it at a COP because of the whole Trump administration approach. And, we had a planetary science pavilion for the first time. We had a lot of media interest. We got a lot of, images on the media, etc. And yet we didn't change the needle. We didn't get fossil fuel mentioned in the COP outcome, which is really kind of where we are. That's why film and storytelling is going to be the most important countering of what communities can do and what they can do together and tell their stories of how they're doing it is going to be the counter to the misrepresentation. There's actually a very interesting article in today's New York Times about it, about the misrepresentation in Belém and generally in our world, and the really tough fight back. But I want to come back to the coral reefs, because we tried, as the guardians of the planetary boundaries, to recall that when we had the Paris Agreement, and I was very much involved, I was the special envoy of the Secretary General at the time, Ban Ki-moon, and the whole story, the emotional story, was the sea level rise, and that the Pacific Islands in particular, the small islands like Vanuatu and the Marshall Islands, would go under. And it was, we had a high ambition coalition led by Tony de Broom of the Marshall Islands, who became a good friend of mine during all this process. He died not long after the Paris Agreement, I'm sorry to say. But that was the emotion. He kept saying to other ministers, do you really want us to no longer be a sovereign people? Do you want us to no longer have a country? Because we would go under in 2050 unless we can get 1.5 into the text. And how we got it was Tony de Broom leading the High Ambition Coalition and the marching in the street, the indigenous peoples, the civil society, young people, etc., marching 1.5 to stay alive. Now, we tried that emotion with two objectives in building on that approach, if you like, that the coral reefs are in real danger of becoming extinct, real danger, in a very short time. I'm told it could be as short as 10 years. Think of that. Think of anybody who's swum in the coral reefs. Think of you're the one who can speak to this. And the other one is the Amazon. We were in the Amazon. And one of our guardians is Carlos Nobre, whom I've known for a long time, wonderful, wonderful scientist, because he's such a gentleman in the best sense. A lovely, wise, kindly, and he talks about the Amazon. He actually often has tears in his eyes at the end of when he's talking about it, because he just can't bear what's happening in the Amazon, he's just and so we were talking about why we needed things, but we didn't penetrate the cup. What we did penetrate, and what is the if you like, the hopeful, because you asked me to bring hope into this, and I do feel very hopeful. I feel very hopeful about what I saw in that film, which lifts me. But the action agendas in Rio, there was a meeting before Belém of cities and sub-regions of federal states. And the United States, through its number of cities and a number of states, was very well represented in Rio, as it was well represented in São Paulo when the business community met. And in both places, you had huge, much more specific commitments. You also had much better nationally determined contributions. The quality of the NDCs was much better. Unfortunately, the ambition wasn't there enough. So it's the old story. We know we have the goals, but we're not on course. So what we need is the kind of storytelling that the approach that you've adopted in the film. I hope this film will be very widely watched, as apparently it is being, and will be used in schools and universities, because it shows what we can do. And this is only in relation to fresh water, basically. There's so much else we can do in relation to, and that is what the message that people need to have. I learned about hope from Archbishop Tutu, and I've told this story quite often. We were on a panel together about 15 years ago, I suppose now, and it was in front of young people in New York. And when Archbishop Tutu was in front of young people, he used to tell them, how much he believed in them, how much he loved them, and they would respond hugely, and he would wave his arms and everything. And we were being moderated by an American journalist, and she said very sharply, "Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist?" And he looked at her, and he shook his head, and he said, "Oh no, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope." And, because it was he who said it, and, knowing his past, fighting apartheid, chairing that Commission on Justice and Peace in South Africa, etc., what he meant was, the glass may not be half full, There may be very little in the glass, but you work with that. You collaborate, you grow it as much as you can. Nobody can do what you can do. You're the only person who can do what you can do, and you must do what you can do to grow, and in particular, to work with others, to work in community, to work in Mehel, to work in Ubuntu, to work in fairness to them, the Brazilians really spread their word, mutirao, which means effectively the same thing as Mehel. They made that very much a theme of the COP. And they're trying now to have, and they had these ethical global stocktakes to match the official stocktake, which had shown the lack of ambition in Dubai, which had led to the nationally determined contributions. They should have been more ambitious in Belém, and they weren't. They were very disappointing, in fact. We now need a groundswell of action. Hope is action in the doing of the kind of doing that we saw very practically, drawing on a wisdom that is very relevant. And these are the things that cut us through the misrepresentation and the fake news and all the rest of it, and the denial that's going on. But it's very heavy, and we're going to have to fight as never before, I think, because we're running out of time. And the science is pretty grim.
Yeah, I think that message of hope is so important, because I suppose you mentioned, Nessa, earlier that oftentimes when you're speaking with your students, you're telling them a certain story and it's the reality. And I think hopefully what this film will teach everyone in the room today is that oftentimes, a negative story doesn't catalyze change, because people feel like there's nothing they can do. And part of this documentary was about creating hope and telling stories. And I mean, Paul, when we talk about solutions at Blue Tech Research, you've been working to build communities who are creating very innovative solutions all around the world to solve some of these challenges. And we have Irish innovators here in the room today, the team at Vortec. And, Paul, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about your perspective around innovation. What makes you hopeful, given your background and experience in the industry, just before we move to get some questions, hopefully, from our audience?
Yeah, well, you're right to shout out the innovators. And indeed, we have some in the room, like Sean Mulligan from Vortec and others, and fantastic work being done at Trinity, at UCD, at DCU, by Fiona O'Regan, at NUIG. And like so many people wanting to make a positive change. I mean, what motivated me to found Blue Tech Research was I could see that will, that optimism. And I thought, God, there's only so much capital, human capital, time, financial capital, and the challenges are great. So we want to make it efficient. We want to use that capital efficiently to make that change. That's what Blue Tech Research's raison d'etre is. I think the one thing that struck me, though, was we in making this film, we said, why? And we thought, if we can change people's values, then we can catalyze something. Because I've watched, many documentaries, and I thought about which ones changed me. And I thought the one that stood out from all the rest, and this is, the story, if I went on a walk to the community of Santiago when I was thinking about this film. And the one that kind of stood up was my octopus teacher. Yeah. Very simple film. One person.
Very moving, very, very moving.
And it kind of rewires you in a way, like for me, I couldn't eat octopus anymore afterwards. And I thought, why was that? And it was just the empathy between that character and the sentient being. And somehow through that transformational journey that one person had, I experienced it. And I thought, how could you make water personal? And then the more we pulled on that thread, Aoife's been on that journey, Ruan helped us all to unwrap it, it's deeply personal. Because it runs through our sense of place, identity, or spirituality, or mythology. It's there, it's universal. If you're from Dublin, it's the River Liffey that's brought alive in the literature of James Joyce. If you're from China, it's the Mekong, the Pearl, the Yangtze. In India, the Brahmaputra, the Ganges, and the Indus are sacred rivers. So as we pulled on this, it became personal. But then the vision became important, because you have to have that vision, Mary, like you spoke about. And I love the symbols. For us, the lighthouse is a symbol we draw on. George Bernard Shaw once said, it's the most altruistic thing ever created by man. Its sole purpose is to serve, and it shows a pathway through rocks and danger to a safe harbor. And there's something beautiful in that symbolism. And that's one of the things I noticed last year, which struck me, was with the Paris Olympics, everyone wanted to see the Olympians swim in the River Seine. Mm-hmm. And the minute we wanted it to happen, the minute the collective will was driven by a vision of what we wanted to happen rather than what we were afraid of happening, it became possible, and we all embraced it when the triathletes were swimming down the river. And the good news is we only need to get to about 15 or 20% before you reach that tipping point. Social science tells us whether it was the abolition of slavery, whether it was the suffragette movement, it's always when that critical mass of people. So if we get enough of these people feeling a certain way, that's the hope anyway. And this is one step.
Thanks, Paul. Well, I'm certainly feeling very hopeful after that. I'd now like to turn over to the audience if anyone has any questions. I see a couple of hands up. So I'm just going to go down here.
Thanks so much. I'd like to ask maybe especially Mary Robinson if she has hope for this just transition away from fossil fuels, the conference that's going to happen in Colombia in April, and whether that could build...
I'm an elder.
Oh, sorry. The conference that's going to happen on the just transition away from fossil fuels in April in Colombia, whether you think that could build towards a treaty.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I think yes. I think people came away from Belém saying we just have to get tougher. And this conference in Colombia, which the Netherlands will be helping Colombia on, I believe will actually get a lot of attention, including probably from countries who may go to see whether they would like to be involved in a potential treaty or not. It's just that sense. We've just got to move the needle more significantly at that global level. Just if I can, respond to Paul, I think the greatest strength of this film is we are nature. And that's a message we can take beyond fresh water, beyond, we can take it, and I think and that's essential. That's why we have this nature symbol. We keep saying, I am a dandelion, I am nature, and I think, that's the most important thing. If we do that, then we'll stop. We'll want to find ways not to be destroying the ecosystems that sustain us, the nature that's that's so wonderful and so beautiful, as we saw in the film. But I do think that Colombia conference at the end of March will be significant.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been a great experience watching the films. So if at some point, I wasn't sure how to present these ideas or questions. In the last semester, when I was in college, I was working on an essay related to the effect of digital media on the social and natural side here in Ireland, and I focus on the effect of AI. I don't want to talk about how AI affect directly ourselves as a society. I don't like AI at all. But what I learned during the process of this essay that I was doing, this research, was the effect and the impact of how all the servers that give power to AI are using all the water to actually cooling down and keep continuing like this huge bubble that we know the AI it is, and it's something that is actually it's going to be affecting Ireland in the next couple of years directly. Affect my country in Chile. In Chile was suspended for political reason, was suspended, but here in Ireland, because Ireland is a highly technological country in development, in a high development way and line of technological development country, that is something that we know that is going to be affect directly all the environment here in Ireland. So I would love to hear from any of you any take on that for the future of the country.
I can probably speak to that a little bit. So through my work as a water scientist, we do work quite closely with tech companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, as with other companies like Unilever and P&G and others, Pepsi-Cola. They all need water. So the amazing thing is that whether you're making ice cream or whether you're making computer chips, like Intel is doing in Kildare, water is like an oil that keeps that machine turning. And they can't do any of this unless they have access to water, and they know that. And there's really three competing groups for access to water. Number one is people, number two is industry, which would include AI, and the third is agriculture. Agriculture is by far and away the largest user of water, and that's the probably the most intransigent problem and the real elephant in the room, particularly because 99% of all of our fresh liquid water, as distinct from frozen water, 99% is groundwater. 70% of all of our food is fed by either groundwater or streams that are fed by groundwater, and much of that's fossil water. So there's a significant challenge on to avoid that depletion. AI at the moment is getting a lot of attention. I mean, it used to be said that if you did a Google search, it'd be a little teaspoon of water was the amount for cooling. Nowadays, like a ChatGPT is about a glass or something, right? So it is significant, and it's growing and growing exponentially. And those companies are very, very aware that people will come first. They know that. And their license to operate will be rescinded. And it's been coming up in the New York Times, it's coming up in articles. Even the Rolling Stone did an article on this last month about how Amazon was taking water from Oregon. They do have a solution, okay? So they can capture rainwater. In this country, Microsoft is exclusively cooling with rainwater because you can store it during the winter. You can replenish aquifers. Apple replenished a groundwater aquifer in Oregon, and that was their solution for the drier summer period. So a lot of the challenges we have are a variable signal where water ebbs and it flows. That's its nature. Industry doesn't like that type of ebb and that flow. It likes a very flat signal. But if you work with it, you can avoid a lot of these things. And they're getting much more efficient. Amazon now may only need water for cooling maybe 1 month in the year. But it's good in that it's drawing attention to a bigger issue, although there are many, many other groups in addition to AI that are competing for water.
Yeah.
I've just the smallest comment. I have two comments. The first is I just want to acknowledge Kong Jianyu died about a month ago. So the amazing Chinese man, Kong Jianyu, who invented with some others, invented the sponge city concept, is dead. But the amazing thing is that he left behind a movement. So he's an example of somebody extraordinary who fought and put his life on the line to try and create something, get something going. But he's left behind, it's not over, it's only begun. So it's important that we find courage in just taking a step, each of us in our own lives, and just to make a little change, because others will follow and others will take up the baton. So I just want to remember Kong Jianyu tonight, but also see him as a visionary who has changed the world, but others are going to follow. The other thing is something that you said, Mary. So we left a lot of stories behind us on the research of this, and all of them, I'm just thinking, listening to you, were women, right? We've a lot of women in this film, so it's not we've equal, but there are women, not men, women all over the world addressing this on a community level. It's an extraordinary thing. It's always women at a community level. I just want to say that.
Thank you. Can I actually ask Rowan a question?
You can, of course.
Our new president, Uachtaráin Catherine Connolly, had a brief chat with me, as she had with most people during the long inauguration in-between bits, especially over lunch. And she said, I really support what you're doing on climate justice. I'm going to work on that myself. And remember, Mary, in Oscailga, we are nature, which is not the same in the English language. Can you actually speak to me a little bit about that? Because I need to do some research on it. I don't think I fully understood what she meant. So maybe you could help me.
You've been put on the spot, Rowan.
You can even have my mic if you like. Okay.
Well, Nílisagam Kadadurchilat. I don't know what she said to you, but I've just come from a book launch a celebration of Moncon's writing, one of his books. My brother is Moncon McGann, and he's a committed ecologist, but very much focused on the Irish language. He wrote a book called 99 Words for Rain. Yeah. And the idea is very much as Paul's original idea for this documentary is that if we reach into our ancestral understanding and knowledge, we have so much. We've 5,000 years, as Kongjan said, of knowledge that we can draw on, whereas empirical science and modern science is only 200 or 300 years old. So modern science is really, really important. But just reaching back into what our ancestors understood, like Shin and Rudavi Iraq, daring, Gwil is fuite fuite sanador. We are intertangled with nature.
Gurmagat.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, so you're right to remember Kangjian. It was while I was sitting in that event in New York where we met you and said hello. I got a text from Leanne and said, "Did you just hear about Kangjian?" He was filming in Brazil and he died in a plane crash.
Oh my
Yeah, a little small 6-seater Cessna went down, and he was doing what he loved doing. He was out there looking at wetlands in the Pantanal. You know, and but he's left a lasting impact, and we're very lucky that we had the opportunity to spend time with him and visit with him. Your brother Mancon's work also informed our work in this project. It was through Mancon's podcast, The Almanac of Ireland, that I became aware of Matthias Schouten, the Dutch environmental philosopher who saved the peatlands, and Mancon was very generous to introduce me to Matthias and even shared early chapters of his books on sacred wells. So we channeled a lot of people and a lot of ideas, really, didn't we? That's what we were working on. But I think nice to acknowledge both here.
I think it's also fair to say that one of the greatest privileges in the world when working on this project was to meet so many amazing people who were so passionate, who lived what they spoke about every single day. And for me, I was completely energized by that. And it said to me that if you surround yourself with those people, the energy that they can pass on to you so that you can build that legacy, you can create the momentum and you can move forward. As Ron was mentioning, Kangjian has a massive legacy, and his sponge cities are popping up all across the globe, and it goes back again to the dandelion and sowing the seed and the momentum and building it, and it's all connectivity. So if I was to ask for everyone here to take away one lesson today, I think when we first started working on this film, Paul, we said, what was the key takeaway we wanted? And we wanted people to fall back in love with water and to understand that maybe not all of you here work with water on a day-to-day basis, but that we all require water to survive, and it's completely part of our life, and you'd notice it in 1 second if it was gone. So I think that's the message, is to reconnect back to nature.
And actually, if I can just say, because I think there may be one or two people here in the room who were involved in it, Project Dandelion Ireland, which is a kind of WhatsApp group that has come together and decided, and I had kind of encouraged this before the conference in Belém in the Amazon, that we would do what had been done before the World Conference for Women 30 years ago in Beijing, and that is make a quilt, but make a double quilt. A quilt and a digital quilt. So 51 organizations ended up making the squares of a quilt, which were sewn together in the Mary Robinson Centre down in Ballina. And then all of those 51 organizations are joined digitally on a platform. And it was sent to Belém as part of the ethical stocktake, because Marina Silva had said she wanted art and culture to be part of this. So this was an offering. And that quilt had a great life in Belém. It kept moving around. I kept, in meetings I was at, and then most of all, in a very big meeting, by Belém standards, with Marina Silva, with the president of the COP, with Anatoni, with the youth representative, etc. We went up on stage to talk about the ethical stocktake, and it was like a carpet in front of us was the quilt, and I had to leave. Actually, Marina Silva had already left, and I had to leave before the end because there were so many people speaking. It went on quite long, and I had something else I had to go to. And then I saw afterwards photographs of a number of people holding up and not an Irish person among them, holding up the quilt and sending a message to Ireland. And it was also on RTE briefly. I managed to, when I was being interviewed, reference the quilt. But it was the importance of the connection between organizations, the connection between communities, and the art of quilt making, and sending this from Ireland to Belém. And it literally did have a very significant impact, and there are a number of countries, Kenya being one of them, that are thinking of continuing this idea of the physical quilt and the digital quilt, as a way of connecting communities, which I think, we will try to build on with Project Dandelion Ireland, from 51 to maybe 500 or 5,000 communities in Ireland, organizing in this way, because that's how.
So you grow and build.
And also, if we can grow in that way through communities bottom up, we will influence the politicians.
Yeah.
Because they, they're influenced by what people really want to see happening.
Oh, 100%, yeah. No one's going to propose a policy they don't think is going to help them get supported, Yeah, I love the idea of the quilt. We came across tapestries, actually, which were used to weave together visions in New York. We saw an artist called Mary Mason. She wove a tapestry of what the city could look like with green roofs, and it kind of was that idea. You can weave the future from these tapestries of our imagination, but and it's the collective participatory aspect of it as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm going to give one more question. I think we have some time, maybe two.
Thank you very much, and that was a wonderful film. Really gives me hope. Am I okay? Yeah, so really gives great hope. I'm going to say something now that's probably not going to be popular, but Mary, it was the New Zealand, the idea that the river has the rights of personhood, and the right to life, really. You were saying the right not to be extinct. Yeah. Well, I mean, just the child in the womb, the unborn child, surely the right not to be extinct.
Yeah, and it's not just in New Zealand. I know in Colombia and in other countries, rivers are now being given a form of personhood. And I like the idea, the right not to be polluted. In other words, relevant rights given but the point being that we are nature and we are linked in a deeper way than we have felt up to now, because we've allowed ourselves to be cut off in some way, and we need to just I had a moment, and I have spoken about this, and it's in the film Mrs. Robinson, the documentary. It was a very moving experience, which is the first time that I think I really felt that I am nature. It was in Greenland. I was gifted with a scientific expedition to Greenland in August 2019, just before COVID. And I was amazed at how warm it was. We were told to go out, and we had gone by boat to a small area with quite primitive huts to stay overnight, to listen to a glacier. And the following morning we were told to be on our own, and go and find a stone or something and sit up, but be on your own. So everybody else spread out, and I just sat outside the place where we were on a nice bench, and I felt the heat, and it was about 19 degrees Celsius in August in Greenland, which it shouldn't be, and listening to the glacier, I was very conscious that it was like thunder. It was rolling thunder. And then every now and again, it was like gunshots when smaller pieces calved from and I actually found myself crying. I was on my own, sitting there, and knowing that the sun was burning my hands and my face in a way I wasn't expecting in Greenland. But I was actually crying because what was happening to the glacier shouldn't be happening. I felt that so deeply. And I'm grateful for that moment, because it really brought to me the full indigenous wisdom. We are nature, and we should cry if what we're doing is, against everything that we should be valuing and loving in the way that the film showed how beautiful and how special and how marvelous nature is, and yet what we are doing. What we have been doing and what we are continuing to do in that sense of harming. We're in breach of 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries. The latest one announced during the UN General Assembly with our planetary health check was the oceans. And the oceans are the reason the coral reefs, the acidification of the oceans. So I'm keen, as I said, to reinforce that message of hope. This is all perfectly doable. All we have to do is switch the money. We have to switch from subsidizing what is harming us. And we spend $1.8 trillion a year subsidizing fossil fuel and bad industrial, agricultural land management. They're the two main things. And if we switched half that, we could incentivize moving much more rapidly where we need to go. It's a human problem. It's not, but there's a lot of billionaires and fossil fuel lobbyists who are determined to make short-term money. That's what it's all about. Short-term, stupid money. Mr. Trump in the United States being the prime example of how stupid it is, but he's doing it. And unfortunately, we're all, waiting for, hopefully, a turnabout again in the United States, because it does matter in the world. Anyway, I didn't mean to go on for so long. But,
Sorry, you're okay.
David Attenborough's last film he made was Oceans.
Yes.
And one of the nice
Brilliant film, yeah.
Wasn't it beautiful? Yeah. I went with my mum and my daughters and in the cinema, and it had a short run, but it was great to see it in the big screen. But what was lovely, wasn't it, at the end where he showed if you leave little areas, that they regenerate pretty quickly.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about the upcoming decision on the nitrates derogation. We've 7,000 farmers facing the cliff edge at the end of the year on the extension of the nitrates derogation. And, as you touched on, Paul, Ireland is very dependent on industry, but also very dependent on agriculture. And we've a decision facing us now in the cliff edge in about 4 weeks' time of what are those 7,000 farmers going to do if we don't get the extension. And I suppose the counterbalance to that is what is the industry going to do if the EPA really start to focus on our rivers and streams and wastewater treatment plants and challenge us to treat nitrates, because we're importing nitrates, we're importing €1 million of fossil fuels every hour here at the moment. And has Ireland got the balance wrong?
Well, look, the green revolution that allows us to feed 9 billion people, many people point to, we could make nitrogen with the Haber-Bosch process. Before that, it was, you get some guano from Latin America and ship it over. So it's been revolutionary in one sense, but it comes at a cost. And the limit in drinking water is 10 milligrams per litre, or you end up with blue baby syndrome. In reality, you can have effects at 1 milligram per litre or 2 milligrams per litre. So, but the solution is either plant along the riparian zone with wetland plants, and it's low cost. It should be subsidized to some extent by the government, but compared to dealing with it at the end of a pipe, it's a lot cheaper to do it in the riparian zone. The other thing is regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture also helps to avoid the need to keep applying those high levels of nitrates. And with the rainfall we're having, you're not even getting the full benefit of it. You're paying for it, and a lot of the natural gas we use is creating nitrogen. We're using fossil fuels to create nitrogen. We're eating oil. But it's being washed away. Now, farmers shouldn't want to be paying for stuff that they're not using. That's a waste of money. And, that goes contrary to what would be good farming practice anyway. So there are ways of getting around it, but I do think, it's a vexed question, and it's a difficult one, and it's very political. But we're probably better off to try and embrace it, grab the nettle, and say, okay, look, there is an issue, and maybe there are some solutions. If we do that, look, we don't want to be raised to the bottom for commodity food in any case. We'd rather be raised to the top for quality food.
Can I just tell an anecdote from last week, which speaks very much to your question? I was in Brussels, and I met the chair of the European Economic and Social Committee, who's an Irishman called Seamus Brennan, a small farmer. And I actually raised the question with him because I was interested to see, as a farmer, what his response would be. And he said to me, actually, we weren't making money on my small farm. It's hard to make money on a small farm. But when we stopped using nitrates 8 years ago, I started making money. It was much better. And it was a really, it was a kind of very interesting example of he was using natural waste and just found. And then I said to him, well, is the real problem the large farmers? And his head nodded. they're the very ones who could switch, but don't switch to a much more natural way of providing the food that we so badly need. But I thought it was nice to get that anecdotal story from a small farmer who now has a key position in one of the European institutions as chair, and he tends to use that position. So hopefully that will help.
No, I put it well. I used two words there which I probably shouldn't use, like regenerative. Like a lot of people don't know what that means, and the riparian zone. I barely know what that means, to be honest. But it just means the bit between the land and the river. That's the bit, right? And if you plant there. But I've seen farmers embracing these ideas in different places, and they get on board, pretty quickly because they see the benefits. Yeah.
I'm conscious that you've been very kind with your time, and as has everyone here in the audience today. I think just a call to action for all of you now that you've seen the film is that if there's a local community that you work with, a school, if your children are in schools and you would like to have the opportunity to share the documentary and you think that would be impactful, please do reach out on the website via the Bravely World Foundation. We are doing screenings free of charge for educational purposes all around the world. I hope everyone here today took something meaningful from the documentary. I hope you think about it again in a few weeks' time and something new comes to you. And with that in mind, I would like to say a massive thank you to all of our panellists for being so generous with their time, to Ruan McGann, our director, and also to Cuivin O'Rallig, who did a beautiful tune for us to get us kicked off. And to all of you for coming out here and choosing to spend your time with us here this evening. Thank you very much.